It's interesting that you, with this woman that you talked about in the beginning, you talk about how she's crouched down and she's looking down at the ground and all that. So it's interesting. In your rules, obviously, the first rule is to stand up straight with your shoulders back, right? Well, when you get, for lack of a better word, indoctrinated. In fact, there is no better word. When you get indoctrinated into the military, that's exactly what's happening. And guess what? You get taught. One of the first things that you get taught is how to stand properly. And you know what they tell you? Chin up, chest out, shoulders back. They make you stand like that. There's no coincidence to that, is there?
Not at all. Not at all. Well, it's a. You could say it's a dominant stance, but that's not the right way of thinking about it. Although it is a dominant stance, the reason to adopt it is not because it's a dominant stance. It's a competent stance. And competence tends to make you dominant, at least in hierarchies that are functioning properly. Because there are hierarchies, which is what I outline in chapter 1. I say the hierarchies are old. They're not socio-cultural constructions. They're not a secondary consequence of capitalism and the free market. All of that is absolute nonsense. It couldn't be more wrong. And as an indication of that, I point out that lobsters, whom we diverged from on the evolutionary front 1/3 billion years ago, have hierarchies, right? And that the neurochemical systems, the neurological systems that lobsters have that mediate their hierarchical status, run on the same chemical that the neurological systems that we use to mediate hierarchy run on. So that's just absolutely mind-boggling. But a lobster, like a victorious lobster, stretches out and adopts a more dominant pose because his serotonin levels go up as he becomes more and more victorious, and that governs posture. Well, and so to stand up straight with your shoulders back is to open yourself up to the world. You're not in the defensive crouch of a prey animal, technically speaking. And that is the circuitry that's governing posture. It's prey versus predator or something like that. And to stand up like that is to expose yourself to the world, but in a bring it on sort of manner. Not precisely combative, but let's say courageous. And your posture announces that. And it doesn't just announce that to other people. It announces that to yourself. And it can be one of those things that can start a virtuous cycle occurring, which is partly why it's taught in the military. You get these guys that come in, they're all slumped over, they don't know how to stand up, they're looking at their feet, their necks are bent. Like, even if they're good-looking men, they don't look good because they're all crunched over. You see people like this on the street all the time. They could be perfectly attractive, except they're completely huddled in. They need to stand up and stretch themselves out. And then they can breathe too. And that's a competent stance. And one of the things that the critics of the modern West don't understand about hierarchies is that, first of all, they're everywhere. They're inevitable. If you're going to have a distinction of value between things, you have a hierarchy. And if you don't want to get rid of the distinction of values between things because then you don't have anything to do. That's foolish. You can't live that way. So I say, well, the hierarchies are based on power. It's like, no, they're not. They're based on competence. And there isn't anything more powerful than competence. But power isn't tyranny. It's not brutality. It's not threat. It might be the hint of all those things. Because I don't think you can be fully competent without being able to hint at those things. But hierarchies in the West are fundamentally based on competence. It doesn't mean they're not flawed, because we miss the mark lots. And there's lots of reasons why perfectly competent people don't attain the position that they deserve and that they should have for their benefit and everyone else's. The hierarchies are tainted by corruption, but fundamentally they're based on competence. So
and that's so with that, this first rule that you put in the book, and you're saying that's a cycle that can go backwards. So you don't have to have like the serotonin first and then you stand up. If you stand up straight, you'll somehow increase your serotonin over time.
Definitely. Well, you signal to yourself.
Didn't you say you could inject lobsters with serotonin and they start to stand straighter?
Yeah, you can basically give them antidepressants. So like if a lobster gets defeated in a fight, then he's statistically more likely to lose the next fight than you would guess from a tally of his previous victories. So that's the first thing. If you lose, you increase your risk of further loss. But if you win, you increase your risk of future gains. That's a very important principle. It's a crucially important principle. It governs life. But yeah, if you take a lobster and he gets all defeated and he's off pouting and won't fight anymore because he's, having a bad day, and you inject him with serotonin, essentially give him antidepressants, it's the same thing, then he'll straighten up and he'll go out and have another scrap. It's like, and I read that, I don't know, it's probably at least 10 years ago when I was reading about, the neurophysiology of these neurochemical systems. That's why I got onto it. It was another thing that just blew me away. I thought, really, you're kidding? That circuit is that old? It's that old? That's way before there were trees, eh?
Yeah.
That's how long ago that is. And so hierarchy is a patriarchal construction. How about no? How about that's wrong? It's seriously wrong.
So I was talking to one of my friends the other night. His name is Joe. He's got a kid that's wrestling. His kid is 6 years old, I think. Dom. And he says, he's getting put into the higher category. He's kind of getting his butt whipped now. Yeah. And I'm really not sure. What do you think? And I said, well, you want him to win. Because when he wins, it's more fun, and he has more fun. So now I have more evidence that you should get your kids in a position. Again, I think your kids should get beat sometimes.
Yeah.
But they should certainly not get beat down all the time.
No, exactly.
I did that to my kids when my kids first started jiu-jitsu. I put them, you're going to compete because I'm telling you to.
Yeah. And
then I'm going to put you in a higher weight class with older kids because that's going to make you tougher. That was my, stupid thinking.
Yeah.
And now with my youngest daughter, I'm like, no. You go out and you have fun. And you go out and you compete against people that are somewhat equal to you, maybe a little bit below you, maybe a little higher.
Yeah,
but
depending on your mood, sometimes. Even. Yeah. Well, absolutely. I think we could think about that also in terms of the conversation about meaning that we started to have. It's like, if you win all the time, that's meaningless. Because, and you think, why? Because you want to win. It's like, yeah, fair enough. So why would winning all the time become meaningless? It's because your theory of winning isn't sophisticated enough. Because here's how you win. You play the game to win, but while you're playing, you play in a way so that you get better at the game, right? Because you're going to play a bunch of games. Well, it's even more than that. You play the game to win, but you play it so that you get better at the game. Okay, fine, that makes sense. So you want to push yourself, right? Because that's how you get better, and so you need competition to push yourself. So you need to have the risk of loss, because otherwise you won't do it. But here's an even better way of thinking about it. You play the game so that you don't only get better at that game, but you get better at the entire set of possible games. And that's what you do when you're a good sport. It's like, well, so how do you do that? Well, partly you find the proper level of competition, right? So you want to be pushed so that you will make the effort necessary to remove what's useless about yourself and to help foster the growth of what's useful. And if you do that, then you get the joy of participating in the game towards victory, but the extra joy of building yourself more and more strongly at the same time. And so when you tell your kid, doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. Your kid says, what do you mean by that? And you say, I don't know. I don't know what I mean by that. Because the kid says, I'm supposed to win, aren't I? It's like, well, yeah. So why does it matter how I play the game? It's like, well, then you're stumped. Even though you're right, you just don't know why.
Right.
But the reason is you want to tell here's the reason. It's like, we can make this very simple. Life is not a game. It's a series of games. It's actually a series of diverse games. Okay, so who's the winner of the series of diverse games? Because that's the real question, right? Not who wins a game. It's like whatever, you win a game. It's like if I hold a gun to your head and we're playing chess, I can say lose. Yeah. It's like I win. It's like, well, that's not helpful, obviously. So you want to teach your kid, you want to help your kid learn to be the winner of the set of diverse games. Okay, so what does that winner look like? Well, here's the first clue. That's the person who keeps getting invited to play. So because you win. If people invite you to play all the time, you have opportunities coming to you just nonstop. And maybe, let's say you have 50 opportunities and each of them are potentially 50% for you and 50% for the other person. You think, well, that's a pretty good deal. And then you think, well, wait a minute, let's flip this around. So it's like 60% for the other person and 40% for me. I'm going to go overboard in the generosity. You think, well, then what happens? Well, then instead of having 20 opportunities at every moment, you have 50 opportunities at every moment. And that's what you want for your kids, is you want all the invisible doors around them to open. And you do that by saying, play nobly, right? Pay attention to your teammates. Pass the damn puck so they get a chance, right? Even if you're the best player on the team, help the people on your team develop. Don't grandstand, right? If you have the opportunity to beat your opponent 20-1, in goals, it doesn't happen very often, but it can, especially when kids are playing. Right. It's like, well, maybe after you're up 7-1, it's like, back off a bit. You don't have to humiliate your opponents. It's because it's what would you say? It's contemptible behavior on your part. And so, and you know that because you go and watch a hockey game or something like that, and you watch a kid that really knows how to play. It's like they're playing like mad to win. They're pushing themselves to be better, but they're paying attention to their damn teammates, and they respect their opponents. And you think, well, that's a hell of a kid there. It's like, yeah, that's exactly right. That kid's going somewhere.
Do kids ever show they get so committed? Let's say hockey, right? You get a kid that's just so committed to winning in hockey that he's going to lose at other games.
Well, that's
other
another
games
problem.
In life, right?
Well, that's another problem. Is like,
so you could be overboard.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is that with sports, like you could say, well, most kids aren't going to be NHL level hockey players. Like that's impossible. Like maybe you should aim for that. I would say probably not because it's so damn unlikely. But whatever, some kids are going to manage that, and more power to them. You say, well, what are the sports for the rest of the kids? And the answer to that is, well, obviously there's the physical discipline and the health that goes along with that, and the ability to engage in and tolerate competition and learn how to be a gracious winner and a gracious loser. But a lot of it is character. That's part of character building. Well, that's what you want. Is you say, well, why build your character? It's like, well, how about that's your set of toolkits that's your set of tools for dealing with catastrophe. How about that for a reason? Right. So one of the things I've suggested to my viewers, this is the men in particular, but not just the men, you should be the most reliable person at your father's funeral. That's a good goal, man. That's a good goal because everyone's broken in a situation like that. And you adding to that brokenness and misery, I mean, you're going to be grieving, like no doubt about it, and no kidding. But there's a time to step forward with some character, and it's the same thing. You're going to be at someone's deathbed. You're going to be quibbling with your siblings while you're doing that? While your parents dying? It's like, it's bad enough that they're dying. That's tragedy, right? But you can turn that into hell, no problem. You just get a bunch of people with no character around a deathbed, and it's like, well, it's bad enough, but that turns it into something like hell. And that happens in people's lives all the time. It's like character is everything. So, and that's why the wise people of our past tradition insisted upon that. They say, well, don't lie. Well, why not? Well, it destroys your character. Well, so what? Well, then you turn suffering into hell. Is that what you want? Maybe, because people will want that. But I would say walk away from people like that, right? That's not, unless that's what you want, then.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of, it's interesting since I just got done reading the book, I can hear you just hitting the wave tops of all the different rules, and they're all interconnected about don't lie or tell the truth, or at least don't lie.
Yeah.
And then, what's the chapter about? Hang around with people that want to see you do well. What's the actual chapter?
Yeah. Make friends with people who want the best for you.
Right.
Yeah. It's a real technical idea. So Carl Rogers, who's a psychotherapist, great psychotherapist, I'd very much recommend his books to people, especially if they want to learn to listen, because he was really good at teaching people how to listen. He had this idea that what he would manifest towards his clients in therapy was unconditional positive regard. And I've always had trouble with that because you don't treat your children, for example, with unconditional positive regard.
You mean so no matter what someone says, you're saying, yeah, that's a good idea?
Yeah, that's why it's tricky. Well, what he didn't articulate it, I think, as well as he might have. What you want to do is, for your child, is that you want the best for the best in them. That's what you want. And that's what you want from people that you surround yourself with. Now, they'll hold you to a high standard if that's the case, right? Because whenever you degenerate in any of the multiple ways that you're likely to degenerate, they're going to whack you on the back of the head and say, clue the hell in, you're demeaning yourself, you're less than you could be. And there's real judgment in that, and it's harsh, but with friends, it's the same thing. You want friends, they're not friends if they're not these people. You want friends who, when something good happens to you, that's good for you, right? They're happy about that. They're not like all bitter and resentful underground and like saying horrible things behind your back and telling you how they did something that was better and trying to drag you down. It's like, that's not helpful. And then when something bad happens to you and you go to them and you say, look, this terrible thing happened to me. First of all, they don't try to top it with some like horrible thing that happened to them because they don't have the patience to listen. And second, they're not secretly gloating about the fact that catastrophe finally befell you. It's like they're actually hurt by it. And that chapter is an injunction, is like, take a look at the people that are around you. And if they're not on the side of what's good for you, then walk away. Because, well, first of all, that's best for them too. If you put up with that, all you're doing is enabling it. It's like, well, it's okay that you mistreat me in a way that's harmful to me and everyone else. It's like, actually, no, that is not okay. It's not the least bit okay. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to help someone when they're down. That's a whole different issue.
What if it's your family? So you know how you say like walk away, right?
Yeah.
Do you still walk away from your family, or do you?
You do if it's necessary.
Yeah.
There's lots of different ways of walking away.
Oh yeah,
you know?
like create boundaries.
Well, there's that for sure. There's that. I mean, you sometimes someone's on an incorrigible path. Yeah. Like there's just nothing you can do. You know, maybe they're aiming down. Yeah. They're aiming down hard. Yeah. And they're bitter, and everything they do is to produce misery, virtually everything. And you have to detach yourself from that. It's like I always think about it from the perspective of a lifeguard. So if you're training to be a lifeguard, one of the things that you're trained to do is to approach someone who's drowning and panicking. And the way you approach them is you put your foot out between you and them, and you push forward with your hands with your foot out. And you basically tell them if they're flailing about, you say, look, I'm here to help, but you have to calm down. And then if they cling to you, like in panic, you push them away. You think, well, that's pretty damn cruel, because what if they drown? It's like, yeah, what if you both drown? That's like not helpful. You're there to rescue them. They take you down. You're both dead. It's like fail, right? So you say, look, quit panicking. I'll help you out, but I'm not drowning along with you. It's like, well, it's the same with someone in your family. It's like if they're on a downward path and you've done your best, you know, you've made your efforts, and they're not paying attention. They're not changing. They say, yeah, well, I'll quit doing this. Yeah, I'll quit doing this. They tell you the same story over and over and over. It's a downhill path. You don't trust it. At some point, first of all, you stop offering your words. That's do not cast pearls before swine. A very, very harsh statement, right? But what it means is if you're offering words of wisdom to someone in the genuine attempt to help, and they treat that with contempt, then shut up, because you're demeaning your words by throwing them away. You think, well, how do you help someone who's aiming down? Well, sometimes you help them by walking away and saying, look, you're aiming down so hard that I am, despite the fact you're my brother, man, it's like, you know, this is killing me. You're aiming down so hard, I'm not coming along with you. And the reason I'm not is to tell you in no uncertain terms that what you're doing is so terrible that I will even violate our kinship to oppose it. And maybe it'll take them 10 years to wake up to that, you know? And so that can be the case because, you know, people often have to be hit so many times before they'll learn. You see that especially if someone's addicted or otherwise pursuing a pathway that's like seriously downhill. So, yeah.
Yeah,
harsh.
You cover that pretty well in that chapter where you're saying there's a certain point where you just got to say, nope, we're done.
Yeah.
We're done.
We're done. Well, it's like, why should I think that you're actually trying to change? Maybe you're just telling me you tell me the story that you use to justify your own idiocy to yourself. And then you tell it to me and you demand that because I'm compassionate, I accept it and therefore validate your excuse. It's like, well, it's really hard not to get tangled up in that, right? Because if someone who's really in rough shape is telling you about why they're suffering, first of all, they're probably about half right in their story. But some of it's justification and excuse and blaming and all of that, failure to take responsibility. It's really hard to stand up and say, no, I don't buy that. No, I don't buy that. No, you're wrong about that. You have to be a brutal bastard in order to do that. But hey, sometimes like surgery is brutal, right? It's brutal, but
Yeah, we're going to cut you open and we're going to rip out part of your body or whatever.
Right, exactly. Right, precisely. And so this chapter about, only making friends with people who want the best for you, that's a brutal chapter, but it's right, unfortunately.